Okay, good morning, everyone. Should we walk through the setup for the first few minutes here? So these are just a couple prerequisites if you want to follow along with the training today. I'm going to walk through these maybe a couple times as people trickle in here, but just make sure that you have everything you need on your computer if you want to be following along. So the first thing to do is install the latest alwaysAI CLI. Today we're focusing on Mac and Linux, but the resources to help you do that are linked there. So if you just go to alwaysai.co, click on the Docs tab, the development computer setup is the link that you want to click, and then from there, you just choose your operating system. So we've got a couple different paths depending on what operating system you have. So for Mac, we have an installer that will walk you through that process. You need to make sure you allow it in your privacy settings, but follow the prompts on screen, and installation should be no problem. If you have an older version of alwaysAI CLI that you've been using, make sure to update to the newest version that was just released yesterday. I believe it's 0.5.36. For Linux users, we have instructions there as well. That's a node-based installation, and make sure that you've got the latest version. Next, which is something a little new, is installing Docker. Yeah, we can. Someone asked me put the link in the chat. Good idea. So there's also, yeah, if you just go to our home site, alwaysai.co. So installing Docker, there's a couple links for Docker. And there's two ways of doing it. For macOS, you can either use the Docker desktop or the Docker Compose, but for Linux, you're going to need the Docker Compose. And follow the instructions on those pages for installing Docker, giving it permission to use your computer. For what we're doing here in model training, it's a pretty processing intensive activity. So we do recommend going into the settings of Docker and allocating good portion of your system's memory. You know, most of the CPUs and a lot of memory, just because the machine learning and the processing is a pretty big pull on most machines. So be prepared for that. The next thing to do is make sure that you have the data set. So this link was emailed out to you in the material. There's you can also get it in the quick start, but get this through your browser. If you navigate to that URL in your browser, it should start the download of the data set. You could also do it through the terminal using wget or something similar. And make sure that you save that on your machine and save it in a place where you know where it is, and you can be able to access it throughout the webinar. And the last thing you need to do is clone the license plate tracking application to an empty directory. And again, just be able to know where that is. And this comes from a blog from my colleague Lila, and I do recommend you read that blog and see what she did, what makes a tracking application different than a regular object detection application, and so forth. But for our purposes, we're going to test the model that we make today using that, because it's got some good videos and good testing material there. So just to start, just clone that into an an empty directory, and then later I'll go over how we use that application. So I'm just going to wait a minute or two. I'm going to start from the top again and kind of give more information as people trickle in. Okay, so I'm going to go over the setup again. We're going to start here in a few minutes. So let me just start from the top. So there's 4 things you need to do if you want to follow along with the webinar today. We're going to install the latest alwaysAI CLI, install Docker, download the data set, and then clone an application that we're going to use. Now, all of this information is in documents on the website. We've got a new model training section, and look up setting up model training there. But you can follow along here. Also, it was sent out in emails for the webinar. So those are a couple places you can look to get links and to follow along. But to start with installing the CLI, if you've used alwaysAI before and if you have a CLI installed, make sure you get the latest version. So for Mac, that means going to the site and getting the latest installer. And for Linux, that means running through Node and installing via npm. And how to do both those things are on the website in the development computer setup page. Next, something new is we need to install Docker, and there's 2 options there. You can install Docker Desktop if you're on a Mac system, or Docker Compose, and that you have the choice of that with Mac, but it's a requirement for Linux. And this will help you follow along. And something that we recommend is configuring Docker to have most of your computer. There's a settings that we go over in the documents to allocate CPUs and allocate memory there. And since model training is a pretty memory intensive activity, we recommend giving it a good amount of your computer. Next, download the data set. This is a pre-compiled data set that we have offered to kind of speed up the process of training a model. Used for practice and demonstration purposes, but this is a set of images and their associated annotations. So get that from the URL. And finally, just clone the license plate tracking application from GitHub to just an empty directory. And for both the data set and that directory of the application, please just have those in a accessible location that you can access as you follow along. I'm going to be looking at the path for those and then navigating it. So that's it. Those 4 things. You should be ready to follow along on this webinar, and we're looking to start here in a couple minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. This is Marty Beard, the CEO of alwaysAI. We're going to start at the formal webinar. Will start at 10:30, right on the dot. So everybody's got about 4 or 5 minutes to complete the setup, and then we'll get going. Hi, for those of you just joining, just letting you know that we'll be formally kicking off the webinar in just a few minutes at 10:30. Thank you. Okay, once again, we're about to get going here in a couple minutes. We've got a bunch of people that have been joining, so welcome. We're going to kick off here in just a couple of minutes. Thank you. Okay, hi, it's Marty Bear. We're going to give this just another 30 seconds and we will kick off at that point. Okay, great. Let me go ahead and formally kick off the webinar. For those of you that joined a bit earlier on the setup, hopefully that helped. For those of you that are just now joining, if you need some help and have some specific questions, please go ahead and submit those questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we've got people that are all waiting to help you out. But let me go ahead and just welcome everybody to the Always AI webinar series. This is our fourth webinar in an ongoing series on computer vision. And just as a quick reminder for those of you that are new to us, we're a software company that helps you, the developer, create, deploy, and operate computer vision applications on the edge, like on IoT devices. That's all we do. That's all that we're about. And we are super excited about the webinar today. One thing that I would like to mention is that we just recently passed 10,000 developer registrations, so we've got a really vibrant community of folks like yourself growing. and which is great. There's tons of interest in computer vision, and I think all of us realize that we're engaged in a major technology shift when we talk about AI, obviously, but computer vision is definitely one of the most exciting and most active areas. And when you think about computer vision on edge devices, potentially one of the most powerful technology shifts that we've seen in a generation, literally making the edge, where we all work and live, come alive. So today, we're super excited to see so much interest in this topic. I mean, we had well over 2,000 registrations for the webinar, which is a record for us, but it's not surprising in the sense that model training is the #1 requested feature from our growing community, and really in the computer vision world in general. And I think for good reason. I mean, all of us know that if you have an effective model, and you can effectively train that model and retrain that model, then you can make your specific application smarter, better, more predictive, more accurate, and just increase the effectiveness of your app. That's why we're all interested in doing this. And I think in addition, we're learning that the metadata that you capture on the edge over time really helps you understand your business and just provide more value to your application and your customers. So today we're really excited because we're gonna give you an in-depth look at the newest part of our platform, which is our model training technology. And we've been in closed beta up to this point, but today we're opening it up for everybody. And really what it's gonna do is it's gonna allow you to train your models to work in your runtime environment. It's gonna allow you to leverage our modules. Everything's very modular in the way that we build our platform. And you're gonna learn about data collection and our data annotation capability and our machine model training and transfer learning capabilities. We built this so you can train locally. You don't have to train in the cloud, which can be an enormous cost savings for you. Also, you can train on CPU or on GPU. And we've also built some really cool visual tools that allow you to evaluate your model accuracy. So you're gonna get all that today. So at the end of the day, this is really giving you a complete platform when you think about alwaysAI in general, to help you with your machine learning model customization all the way to your computer vision application development, and then the actual deployment and operation on the edge. So again, we're super proud of the growing community and really proud of the platform and what we're gonna showcase to you today. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let me hand it back over to Todd Gleed, our product manager, and let's get into the product. Todd?
Thank you, Marty. Hello, everyone, and good morning. As you know, my name is Todd Gleed. I'm product manager for this model training toolkit. And what I'm going to go over today is starting out with why model training. Why are people interested in this? Why is it our most requested feature? And then I'm going to go down into the steps of model training, give you a little bit about data collection and generation, but then really the focus of this is on the model training section. So I will be demoing that, how to train a model, and then how to use that model with alwaysAI. Of course, at the end, leaving time for questions. Next slide, please. So why model training? Why do you want to train a custom model? And really there's 3 reasons, and that is control, flexibility, and performance. So if you're familiar with us, you know that we have a lot of models in our model catalog, and these are public models for use by anyone. We've got over 60 of them with a wide range of classes. Most of these are trained on large public data sets with hundreds of classes. But that's not always the most optimal model to use in your application. We have a lot of people coming with very specific applications. For example, in manufacturing, you have a factory and you want to track your widget as it gets assembled or as it gets made, and there's not going to be a public model available for that. What you're producing is unique to you, and so you're going to need control of what the model is detecting, and that's going to be your widget. So model training allows you to do that. And then as far as flexibility, you can move your inferencing cameras from the end of the factory line to the middle. You can get it at different points in the manufacturing process, and you can update what the model is detecting simply by adding data and by annotating that and then retraining the model. So it's very flexible in what you can detect. And then as far as performance, since you are collecting data in the area where you're going to be inferencing in your environment, and you're limiting the classes just to the ones that you're interested in detecting, the performance is going to have a great improvement. It's not a general model meant to be used by multiple people in multiple applications. It's very specific to your application. So that's when we think that people are looking for this feature, and we're excited to be bringing it out. Next slide, please. So let's go generally over the model retraining process, and that is 3 steps. First is getting your data set, training the model, and then using the model. As far as getting your data set, that involves data collection and data annotation. And my colleague Lila in our Hacky Hour tomorrow will be going more over that part of the process. I'm going to touch on it a little bit today, just kind of give a brief overview, but we will go more in depth in that part of the process. And so what you end up there with is images and annotations associated with those images, and you bring them into the model training part. And this is running a series of scripts perform machine learning to learn on those images and begin to detect those objects and get better over time. And we have simplified this process from ingesting the data set to configuring the training. And the next is using that model. So we are tied directly into alwaysAI platform. You can upload the model to your personal model catalog that is private to you, and then use that model in the same way you do our public catalog. It's straightforward, so that you can bring it down and test and iterate in your application. Next slide, please. So what is the goal of this webinar? What are we doing today? So the goal of this webinar is to come out of it having trained a model and then using that model in an application. And specifically, we're looking at a license plate detection model. And this came from a survey that we sent out to our users saying, what classes do you want to detect on? What applications are you making that need a model that we don't have? And a number of people came back with license plate detector, whether it's doing security in a parking garage, or, they had applications in mind. So we went out and built this model. So I went over this before it started, but to follow along, there's 3 things you need. You need to download the data set. This is something that's pre-compiled. It's the same data set pared down a little bit from the model that we trained. You need to install the latest CLI version. And if you've been using us before, you need to update because we released a version yesterday. So get the latest version so you have access to the toolkit, and then get the Git repository. That is from a blog from my colleague Lila, where she kind of talks about the license plate model and talks about the app used to test it. So I recommend reading the blog and going through that documentation. But for now, just get the application files to your computer. And we've got people standing by. So if you need help, either in the chat or the QA, this will really make sure that you're ready to follow along. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little details about our training tools. So we are doing an object detection model. So we're drawing bounding boxes around the objects that we're intending to detect. And its framework is TensorFlow 1.14. That's a stable version of TensorFlow that we've kind of built around to use as the back end and put a nice front end over that to make it easy. We are using transfer learning with a MobileNet SSD. And what that means is we're leveraging a model that has been trained on 100,000 images for hundreds of thousands of iterations on the COCO data set. And that just gets all the edge detection and other primitives are all already built into the model, and then we're just freezing those layers and exposing a couple new layers, and that's what we're writing our model on. So you don't need as many, you don't need hundreds of thousands of images, and you don't need to train it for as long as time because that base work has already been done. And as Marty mentioned, we do have CPU and GPU versions available. In addition, we also have a couple interfaces you can use. If you're familiar with alwaysAI and you've used it before and you love the CLI, we've got a CLI version. It's got a pretty long command there that can be unwieldy, but we've documented it really well. You know, follow along. It's a pretty straightforward process once you start that iteration. But if you want a more graphical interface, we also have the Jupyter Notebook, and I'm focusing more on the graphical interface today. But everything is documented and it works the same. So use us however you like. Next slide, please. So what is a data set? I'm just going to briefly go over what is involved here, because in order to start training a model, you need a data set. So a data set is just a collection of images. It can be video, but eventually we're going to be training on images. So you need to sample and turn that video into images, and then annotations. And for object detection, that is bounding boxes around the target objects. And you can see there we have vehicles and license plates. So next slide. So what kind of images? So we built this to be a general model, trying to get a variety of scenes and situations so that it could be useful to anyone with an application idea. So we mixed up the data set, made sure we had a variety of lighting. We got dark in the garage, bright light, sunlight, and then also sunset. Just trying to we say kind of capture as you're going to inference, and we wanted to keep that general. We also have a variety of angles, right up next to cars, in parking lot at license plate level, as well as above, and then size of target. So that's how much of the object fills the frame. And where do we get them? So we went out and took them ourselves. That's pretty standard. You can do it with your phone, do it with a webcam. We have an application to do it with your edge device. But also there's other ways of getting images if your target it's not reasonable to kind of make up a scene. And that's, you can scrape Google Images, do some searches there, or do the same thing with kind of the wide open source data sets, kind of carve out a class or a label or two, and then get only those images and associated annotations. And Google also has a data set search engine. Next slide, please. So once you have your images, then you need to annotate them. And so this is a time and labor intensive process, but we tried to simplify. So we built CVAT, which is an open source annotation tool, but we built that into the CLI, so you don't have to worry about installing that. And we have a set of kind of recommendations to help you with this annotation process. Our annotations are in Pascal VOC format. So you'll see, if you've been looking into creating data sets, there's a couple different formats with JSON, Cocoa format. We use Pascal VOC. So you can bring in an outside data set that you have that you may be trained in another place, but just make sure that the annotations are in Pascal VOC. And yeah, just really get accurate and detailed with these annotations. The adage is garbage in, garbage out. And that just means, if you're sloppy with annotations, or if there's not good examples of the classes, then it's not going to make your model perform the way you want it to. So this is just kind of an introduction to the data set. Like I said, tomorrow during our weekly hacky hour, we're going to be going more into collecting data, annotating data, that sort of thing. Next slide. Okay, so let's get into training a model. Let me share my screen here. Okay, So the first thing we do is start the Jupyter notebook. I'm going to be demonstrating the Jupyter method today. The way we do that is with an alwaysAI command, and what we're doing is training a data set. So do data set train, and then what's next? This is the path to your data set. This is where I told you to put this in a, excuse me, in a place where you could access it. And so this is where we're going. So this is the path to your data set. And then the other flag you need is just Jupyter. And this tells it that, that we're running it through the Jupyter notebook. Like I mentioned, if you want to run it through the CLI, you need to configure it here in the command line, and then we won't include the Jupyter flag. And so what this does is this starts the notebook on your localhost and gives you a number of URLs that you can access this notebook. So I access it here on my local machine, and then I open the notebook right here. So what we'll do to start it out is just run all the cells. This will bring up the configuration to start out the training. So I've ran all cells, and the configuration is now displayed. So what we're going to configure is number of steps. This tells the model how many times to go through training, and then the labels. And these are the objects that you are training on. So for this demonstration data set, it's license plate with an underscore there, and then comma vehicle. The training fraction, this is the setting the proportion of images that you're training on versus the number that you're keeping aside to validate. And what that does is it stops the training part every so often and tests how training is going by inferencing against novel images. And so, 80% for train, 20% for validation, 70%. You kind of play with that depending on the size of your data set. With smaller data set, maybe you want to allocate more to training, but that's something you can play with. Batch size here, this is determining the number of images that you're going to process at one time before updating the weights of your model. So this is kind of memory. It's really dependent on the amount of memory. So if you're using a GPU, you can go up, 8, 16, 32. But with the CPU here, especially, running Zoom and stuff, we'll keep at batch size 4. Model ID is where we'll name the model. The first part of the model ID is your alwaysAI username. So this is, you can find it on your profile on the alwaysAI page, but you do need to have an alwaysAI account and be signed in to run this training. And then the second half here after the slash is the name of your model. And so you can name that whatever you want. This is, the next configurations are for the plot. So this is not going to be here in the CLI version, but this is, we're plotting the loss. So that is calculated after every step. It averages the number of images that you've specified in batch size and gives you the loss for those images. And what that is kind of comparing the ground truth, which is your annotations that you've given there, to the prediction, and then updating accordingly. So this is telling you how often to do that. And this is something that you don't necessarily need to do every step. It gets pretty busy on the graph, but you can play with how detailed you want to get with that. And then this validation is what I mentioned before about this training validation ratio. How often do you want it to stop training mode, turn into validation mode, and give you kind of an updated report of how the model is performing. And so we plot both those on this graph down here and kind of compare them to one another. And what you're looking for in this graph is just progress, just improvement. And you'll see that loss starts out pretty high. It's going to start at 40 or 50, and that's because the model doesn't know what it's looking for. It's kind of a random guess. It throws some guesses at what's there, but it's not going to be very good right when you start out. But you're looking for that pretty steep drop pretty quickly as the model gets feedback on the guesses it's made and adjust weights accordingly. So if you don't see an initial drop like this, there may be a problem with your data set, and that can come from misaligned labels. Maybe they got off by one or something like that, or it can come from a conversion error where maybe you're doing height by width instead of x the x value. So if you don't see a pretty immediate drop, you may need to make some adjustments to your data set. And then throughout training, what we're looking for with the loss is just kind of a downward trend. It's going to go pretty steep at the beginning and then level out, and then it will be noisy going up and down, but that's to be expected because of the the variance in our images. But the general trend should be down. And if it flattens out for too long, then you've probably gotten all the value you can get from training that data at this time. Contrasting that with the validation. So like I said, that's going to be plotted alongside, and that's going to follow the loss pretty closely. It's going to be a little higher because it's novel images that haven't been trained on. But what you're looking for with the validation line is making sure that it doesn't start going up. So they're both kind of going to level out. But if the validation starts increasing, that means that your model is getting better on the images that it's training on, but it's getting worse on novel images. So it's overfitting. So that's another sign that you probably got all the value you can from this training, and need to stop, and you're not getting any better the longer you train. So like I said, it's kind of processor intensive. So I'm not going to be able to finish this training during this webinar, especially because I'm running video and I'm running Zoom, trying to do a couple things. So I'm going to let this go, but I have another model that I've made earlier to kind of demo what to do once the model has finished. So here, this you could see. So earlier today, I trained a model, the same thing, same data set, same number of steps, and this is what it looks like when you train on the CLI. So you could see that it's got the loss here, a little noisy. It's a little harder to see, the trends. You can see it. You can see it getting lower, but it does give you the same information, just in a little different form. It tells you, how long it took. So this took 31 minutes. That's about what we were shooting for this kind of tester model. And then it gives you the name of the model and the version. So especially for something like this, where we're just giving a demonstration of how to complete a model, to make it, more accurate, better at predicting, you're going to want to train it more steps. And so, that feature, we just do continue from version, and then we put the version of the model that you trained previously. And you can, do a number of versions, train in jumps, and really you're not losing any of the previous training that you've done. So what I'm going to demonstrate now is, so we completed the model. Now I'm going to upload it to the alwaysAI site to my personal models. So this is a alwaysAI command, and this is using the model publish command, and then putting the ID, which again is your username, and then the model name. So this is going into your cache. Once you train the model, we store it on your computer. We version it out, kind of leave them there. But it looks in there and it gets the latest version of the model that you're training, and uploads that to your models. Let me show you where to find that. So this is the alwaysAI dashboard. This recently got a new makeover. So this is looking really good if you're not familiar with this. And we go to our models page. And so this is where the model will be once it uploads. Again, once you upload it here, you can access it just like you would a public model, just like you would one from our catalog. And I'll show you how to do that. So this is taking a little long again because I'm trying to do a lot of stuff. I'm training a model and doing this webinar, but it looks like it's chugging along and it's there. So refresh. So now we have the webinar model. Now this is a private model. So you can see here that this is available only to you. You can add it to a project and share that project with people, but this is not going to be visible in the general model catalog. It'll be available to you. And then we keep versions here. So if you train it for more steps and upload it, we'll just do that via versions. And you can access past and previous versions if you need to. So now I'm going to use that model that I just trained in an application. Again, Lila has created this application. So clone it. I've already done so, cloned it into a project here. If it takes a little bit of time, it's got some videos in there. So I'll just navigate to that project. And then what you need to do is kind of associate this project as an AAI project with your project. So that's AI app configure, and that'll add it to your projects. You just follow the prompts once those come up. I'm going to create a new project with the same name. Here and I'm deploying to my local computer. But this creates all the files necessary to be a alwaysAI application. The next thing we need to do is add that model that we just uploaded to our private catalog to this application. So that's AI app, and that's models add, and then we do that ID, which again is your username, and let's make sure that's the right one. Webinar model, correct. And so what this does is it brings it down and it adds it to the app.json, if you're familiar with that. And if you have used this before, you know that there's one more step to use this model in the application, and that is adding the model to the app.py. So that's here in the object detection. So this is our license plate model is the default model for this project. And so you can run it against that model and see the comparison. So for that model, we had about twice as many images. Like I said, we kind of pared down the number of images just so it wasn't so unwieldy for demonstration. And then we trained it a lot more steps. So we just did 2,000. But for the model that's on the catalog that we felt was in a place that we could share, we probably ran about like 30 times that just to bump up the performance and make sure that it was good quality. So then we save this app.py, and then we finish installing. And this brings down the models from the web, installs the virtual environment, and prepares you for running. And then we run the application. If you're not familiar, what this does is it runs the model. It gives you a local host here, which is a streamer, and it's showing the model. So you see vehicles. It's going all right. We got some double action there, but this is kind of to be expected. 2,000 steps, and yeah. So this is using the model. Okay, let's check out the Jupyter notebook. See, so um, what we have here is the graph. You could see the step. You could see the loss noisy here, and the um, the trend line of the validation loss kind of going alongside the training loss. So what you can expect to see is this kind of going up and down along this graph as you train, and for this to just keep plugging in the background. So yeah, use any of the interfaces that you want. They'll both do the same results. Okay, can we bring back up the slides, please? Okay, so we trained a model. I showed you the Jupyter notebook, saw the results of the CLI. What's next? So for you, one would be improving this model. So as you saw, the model was detecting, maybe not as good. It's not necessarily application ready. It's just kind of, proof of concept. Is it detecting? And you saw the progress. So train it for more steps. That's the good first way to improve the performance of it, and then add data to it. If you've got a specific usage in mind, like a garage, parking garage or something like that, then you're going to want to do darker images in that location. If you want to count cars from an overpass, then add images from that location and retrain and then just test and iterate. Use the continue from version function, and that way you don't lose any training that you've already completed. You can just add on to it, and then create a new model. And so what does that look like? It's collecting data, annotating that data, and then bringing it in training. And again, as far as that collecting data and annotating, Lila's going to be going over more of tips and tricks and things to do with that tomorrow in Hacky Hour. So if you've got questions or want to bring data sets, be sure to join that. And then what's next for us? So we are really happy with what pulled out. I'm going to thank the engineering team, Andres and Tyga and Steve and Mitch. Done a great job, but we're just getting started. So we got a long roadmap, starting with adding base models. Like I said, we've got the mobile net and that single shot detection model. Right now, we want to add different kinds of models. An RCNN, faster RCNN, and YOLO, and then expose more configuration. So right now we've exposed kind of the base configurations with the goal of making it easy, making it simple, and getting a trained model out of the box. But once you start iterating and testing, you may want some of the more advanced configurations, like adjusting the learning rate or the decay factor or the steps at which it starts decaying, and also data augmentation options kind of built in. So we're looking at exposing those, and then improving the interface. So we think the graphical interface is the way forward. And so Jupyter notebooks aren't really the best medium for that. And so coming down the pipeline is more modern interface techniques. And so again, we're releasing for open beta, and this is a true beta. So we want your feedback. We want what features you guys want, what's working and what's not, and we can iterate and create new features rapidly. So with that, before questions, I'm going to hand it back to Marty to tell us what else is coming.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Todd. If we can go to the next slide. So again, what we like to do in these webinars is actually live walk you through whatever feature we're highlighting. We're just, again, super psyched to be able to introduce this new capability, this critical capability into the overall flow. And hopefully you got a sense of how we're simplifying that, again, keeping it on your local machine if you'd like, and end to end, making it possible for you to build an app, optimize it, deploy it. So we, like Todd said, I mean, we just suggest, get into it. Let's get involved, start interacting with the community. We have a really vibrant community. They'd love to hear your ideas and brainstorm with you and help you along the way. As Todd mentioned, every week, every Thursday, we have a hack hour, which is really just a live session to help you code and help answer your questions. We also spent a lot of time, based on feedback from our developer community on improving our docs, putting blogs out that make it really, highlight what you can do with the technology and so forth. And obviously with our YouTube channel, this has been recorded, by the way, so everybody will get a link to that and just help you to keep learning. Our next webinar, and then we're going to go to Q&A because we've had a ton of questions. So hang in there for that. But just a real quick update. Our next webinar is actually on September 17th. We're doing that with our partner, NVIDIA, where we'll really be, highlighting how to accelerate computer vision on the NVIDIA Jetson family using alwaysAI. So we're excited about that. And we'll send out information to everybody on that about how you can register and so forth. So without further ado, let's get into the questions. We've had a ton of questions come in while we were going through this and while Todd was demoing the product. So let me hand it over to Lila, who's going to MC us through the Q&A session.
Thanks, Marty. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
So great, I'm Lila. I'm an intern with alwaysAI, and we've got a lot of questions that have already come in, as Marty mentioned. So the first one we have is, how can we enable CVAT for data annotation in our system? And as Todd mentioned, we're going to be doing a ton of data annotation, data collection stuff tomorrow. So we do have all of the setup stuff in our docs that were linked at the beginning of the webinar. So you can always find that there. But if you want a step-by-step tutorial, I will do that all tomorrow. And if you have any trouble, we'll be there live that you can ask us some questions and we can help get that sort of stuff fixed. Also, you can always ping us on Discord if you're having any trouble getting that stuff set up. So the second question we have is that we got a lot is where can you get the data set that we used in this webinar? And that's in the chat, a few different places, but it's in the GitHub repo on our alwaysAI GitHub. So you can always find that on alwaysAI GitHub under the license plate tracker. You can find it in our docs again, under the setup, under the quick start guide. We want to make sure there's lots of places you guys can get that. So if you need it right now, check in the chat. Jason just put it back in there so that it's up at the top. And then you can look in the setup guide if you're doing it and you want to see it when you're setting yourself up. The third question we have is, do we have a certification program? And we don't yet, but that's something that there's been a lot of interest in. And Jason is working on getting that sort of thing set up. And if you want to ping him directly on email, you could do jason.ku@alwaysai.co and let him know you're interested and then receive updates whenever we get that started. And another question that just came in is, what is the difference between the model that Todd just trained and the model that's up in the alwaysAI catalog for license plate detection? And really the only difference is that we trained it a bunch more steps, as Todd mentioned. You can see all the steps that we did in terms of data collection and decision points in that blog he mentioned up at the beginning, which I'll put in the chat right now. So this has a lot of decision points, a lot of considerations for data collection, which we'll also talk about tomorrow. We also have a data capture guide on those docs that he referenced. I can put that in the chat as well. So that kind of stuff the data set was a little larger, there might have been some slightly different images. And if you wanted to train a license plate detector that detected a very specific type of license plate, you know, maybe better detection for European plates because ours had some European plates in it, you could change your data set and then just really keep running it for more steps until you found that it was working better for your specific use case. But really the idea here is that we're not doing anything that you couldn't do yourself. It's just the number of steps you train it and the data that you use. So you really can decide what models you're building here, and the only difference is how many times you train it. Let's see what some other questions we have. A lot of questions on can we use Windows, and right now it's just for Mac and Linux, but you know, there's some possibilities for you trying it on a virtual machine. We're going to get it out in the next major release, so that's coming soon. And if you sign up for an account, you'll get notifications when that new release comes out. And you can always find it, all the release notes on our website under the installation release notes, just to see what new features have come out since the last release. Let's see if there's any more questions. Do you have to publish a model to use it? And the answer is no, you can use it locally. We have all the documentation up on our website for using a model after you've trained it. You can publish it to share it with your team and your projects. You can, there's commands to pull down newer models that your team has published. You can use a local version by using the local version tag and then specifying which version you want to test. So that's one way you can use it without committing it up to your projects and teams, maybe if you don't want somebody else to see your finished model just yet. Let's see, can you publish multiple versions of a model? Yes, you can publish as many versions of the model as you want. If you use the alwaysAI models publish command, it will publish the newest version of your model. So in that sense, you can only publish one version of your specific model at a time, but you can publish different models you've trained. You can update a version of a model. If you continue training it and you want to update it, you can do that. Let's see. Is there a limit to the amount of data that you can train? There is, but it's a pretty big limit. So anything over a little bit more than 2 gigabytes, that will not be allowed. And then if you have any system settings on your own personal computer, that might hinder training really like a lot of files or huge files. But you can train the model, the license plate detection model, in under 2 gigabytes. So it's not really a limitation. Do you have to keep using the same training settings between different iterations of training? And the answer is no. You can mix and match. You can change the batch size, the number of steps. You can switch from Jupyter to CLI. You can, one thing that's been suggested is using the CLI for the first few steps because it will run a little bit faster and you can see kind of those precision and recall values that tell you how your model is doing. And then maybe as you get closer to being done, you can train it on Jupyter and see how the loss is reacting, the validation loss versus the training loss. And that might, you can toggle those values Todd mentioned, plotting them more frequently, possibly. If you're doing less number of steps, that won't take as long. And then you can kind of start to fine tune things. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And let's see, do we have any others? And just a reminder that all the recordings and the links will be available after the webinar is posted. So if you couldn't get set up in time and you want to go through it again, you can rewatch it later. And all of the documentation is on the website. Go to alwaysai.co and go to docs. It's all there under model training documentation. And then tomorrow, if you want to join Hacky Hour, we'll get you all set up for data annotation and data collection and show you some tips and tricks for that. And be there to answer all of your questions regarding data annotation and getting set up with CVAT as well. Nice. think we've got a couple more here that we can answer. And as Todd mentioned, the format for data training is Pascal VOC. So we'll go over that a little bit more tomorrow. If you have data that you've already annotated somewhere else, maybe with Supervisely, there might be a way you can convert that, but for now it's Pascal VOC, which is an XML format. And we'll show you exactly what that looks like tomorrow. If you have data that you've already annotated, or if you're using a data set, as Todd mentioned, from elsewhere, to kind of get started with model training. And I think that's about it we have for questions. Thanks so much for coming, you guys. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at the Hacky Hour for some data annotation. And that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.